This week on Political Capital, safety reviews announced for all U.S. nuclear plants as the crisis in Japan reverberates around the world. Do the benefits outweigh the risk? We asked Senator Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico, chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. And in the last word, the budget battle highlights divisions within the parties.
Go down this path.
We begin the show with Democratic Senator Jeff Bingaman, who joins us in the studio. Chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. Senator, you are fully briefed. Is this Japanese disaster the worst nuclear disaster in history, and how's it going to end up?
I don't think it's the worst in history. I think Chernobyl's the worst in history.
So it won't be quite that bad.
Right. I don't believe it will, but there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen, and I don't pretend to have the answer to that, but I think it's clearly a very significant and serious problem that we hope both the Japanese and ourselves can learn a great deal from.
You, along with President Obama and others, have said that nuclear has to be part of the future U.S. energy strategy or policy. With this tragedy, is the nuclear renaissance over, though?
Well, the so-called nuclear renaissance is not really occurred in a meaningful way. We have something in the range of 20 applications before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to build new nuclear plants, but I think there's only one now that is under construction. And we have 104 plants that are operating, and so I think the thing that's held the nuclear power industry back in recent years has been the economics. It just costs so much to build a nuclear power plant.
But this isn't going to make that any easier.
No, there's no question. This raises a whole new set of questions.
Right.
And depending upon what is determined ultimately from this, it could be a significant impediment to construction of new plants, but perhaps not. We need to see in the future.
Let me ask you a couple particulars there. The administration, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, are reviewing all U.S. facilities. I think it's 1/5 of our reactors have the same design as that Japanese. Now, they're not, located, near an earthquake, or most of them aren't. But do you think we should consider temporarily closing a few of those who may be in the most dangerous spots until we know all the facts?
I don't know of anything that would justify closing down the facilities that are now operating. I think the president was wise to order a safety review of all of our 104 plants. And if something is determined as a result of that review that would justify shutting them down, that's obviously what we should do. I don't know of anything that would justify shutting them down before that review is done.
The Germans, as you know, suspended relicensings of plants. There are others who said we ought to put a moratorium on 18 to 20 new applications. Merit neither of those approaches?
Well, as far as putting a moratorium on applications, the processing of an application takes years before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm sure that our Nuclear Regulatory Commission will take into account whatever is learned from what's going on in Japan.
And you don't think we should go the German route of?
I can't see what justification there would be for stopping the use of nuclear power plants that have been certified and that are operating safely.
Is this accident underscore the need for the U.S. to move forward expeditiously on a permanent repository plan site, including putting Yucca Mountain back on the agenda?
Well, I've always favored going ahead with a permanent repository for nuclear waste. I don't know that there's anything about this incident in Japan, this tragedy in Japan, that changes that particularly. I mean, we need a long-term storage plan for nuclear waste, and we've needed that for a long time.
Do you think there's any prospect for that occurring in the rest of your tenure in the Senate?
Well, there is a Blue Ribbon Commission that the President's appointed that has been meeting for about a year now, that is coming out with a report this summer, making recommendations for what should be done if we're not going to use Yucca Mountain. And of course, the administration's position is we will not use Yucca Mountain as a repository. So So once those recommendations come from that commission, I think at that point it would be appropriate for us to see if they've recommended something we ought to adopt.
Now, going back to Japan, people can't be reassured without candor and transparency. Now, Bloomberg reported this week that Tokyo Electric Power Company has a long history of falsified reports, and our top officials, some of what they've told us, it doesn't square with what the Japanese are saying. Is Japan hurting itself with a lack of transparency here?
Well, I do think you're right that the Tokyo Electric Power does have some credibility problems on some of these issues based on prior actions, and I think myself that we should do all we can to persuade the Japanese of the views that our experts have come up with, and see if we can stay on the same page with them as far as our estimation of the risk, as far as our plans for assisting them to deal with this crisis. All of that, I think, is helpful.
Senator, as you know, as gasoline prices soar, Republicans have assailed the Obama administration for what they say are overzealous environmental regulations and stifling exploration or drilling. You gave a speech on the Senate floor this week that says none of that's true. Do you think Republicans are playing politics with gasoline prices?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. Whenever the price of gas at the pump goes up, Americans get to looking around for who's to blame, and that's understandable. And I think that it's very convenient if you want to find a scapegoat to say the president's bound to be to blame. He's in the White House. I think the truth is the price of oil at the pump, or the price of gasoline at the pump, directly tracks the price of oil on world markets, and there's nothing that I know of that the Obama administration has done that has raised the price of oil on world markets. They've been trying to do what they could to keep the price of oil from going up, but they haven't raised it.
You're chairman of the committee. Do you plan to introduce and push sometime soon this year clean air energy legislation, and if so, will it include a nuclear component?
We have been trying to see if we could get a consensus in our committee to go ahead with something like the president called for in his State of the Union speech, which would be a clean energy standard, which would be trying to put in a requirement in law that utilities move to where 80% of the electricity they're producing be from clean energy sources, and he defined that to include nuclear, natural gas, clean coal, a variety of
How are the
things.
prospects looking?
Well, I don't know. It's too soon to know. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough, and anything's tough in Washington these days. But this of course, will be tough too. But we're working on it, and we hope we can make some progress.
Okay, Chairman Bingaman, thank you so much for being with us. And when we come back, the UN gets tough with Gaddafi. We'll talk to our reporters next.
All attacks against civilians must stop. Let me be clear, these terms are not negotiable.
Welcome back. After weeks of debating, the UN has approved a no-fly zone over Libya. How much will it help? Bloomberg's White House reporter Hans Nichols and diplomatic correspondent Indira Lakshmanan join me now to talk about this. Indira, the stakes are huge. We being the West, have got to topple Gaddafi.
Well, I think at this point there's no turning back. Obama and all of the European allies have essentially made clear that Gaddafi has got to go. And after stating that rhetorically and also voting for that at the United Nations Security Council, there is no turning back. This is a man who we know is vindictive, who has pledged to take vengeance against anyone who stood against him. That would include foreign companies who are invested in Libya, whose governments have turned against him. And it also might mean a return to his weapons of mass destruction program or to sponsorship of terrorism. So the stakes are very high.
We also know he probably will not go quietly into the night. We shouldn't be lulled into ceasefires and all that kind of stuff.
I think it's pretty unlikely. I mean, just a couple of days ago, his son, Saif al-Islam, was poo-pooing the idea of any kind of UN Security Council resolution before it was approved and said, we will be at the gates of Benghazi within 48 hours. It's all too late. As soon as the UN voted to approve it, they changed changed their tune
Yeah.
and said, we'll talk, but
Yeah.
I don't know that that can be
If
trusted.
the military escalates, the military action escalates, Indira, it's a UN action, of course, but is the U.S. going to play the dominant role?
I don't think the U.S. wants to be seen as playing the dominant role. There's no question that the U.S. has military assets that other countries do not have, but Britain and France have made it very clear they're willing to take a lead, and the U.S. has made it crystal clear that it wants Arab League participation, and several Arab League countries, including the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, have said that they're willing to participate. So that's key, that it will be seen as a multilateral action.
Hans, we don't want to spend a lot of time looking back, but the White House looked like they were pretty much behind the curve throughout this.
And then there was a shift, at least rhetorically, midweek, maybe mid-late week on Thursday. You saw the White House really embrace the idea not just of a no-fly zone, but went beyond that when it looked like a no-fly zone would no longer really protect civilians within Libya. What you're seeing from the administration now is furious diplomacy on trying to broaden the coalition. They did pretty well in getting this up at the UN, but now they need more than just rhetorical support from the Arab states. They need military support. That's going to be something they're going to insist upon. Unclear when you get into the assets if they're actually there and how much of this equipment is U.S. specific.
In private, did they bring Defense Secretary Bob Gates along in reality? I mean, he was the great reluctant warrior before this.
Either that or Gates was out there in front saying this is going to be difficult and you're going to need more international support, so the U.S. wasn't seen as taking the lead on the no-fly zone. If that was the strategy, and I don't know if it was, but if that was, it was pretty clever, and that gave them some plausible deniability if this does go south.
Of course, the key move really was the Arab League. Probably couldn't have done it without that. Indira, you brought in the Washington representative a couple weeks ago who foreshadowed that. I think that really was wasn't that, absolutely...
Yeah, Hillary Clinton has said that that was key, and that it was key to changing her mind in terms of having Arab League support, because once you have the neighborhood, all of the neighbors saying that they want UN action against one of their members, it's hard to not listen to that.
This has overshadowed another huge story in the region. There's a crackdown on opposition, the opposition in Bahrain, which is, of course, home of the U.S. Fifth Fleet.
That's right. I mean, let's not forget all of this Arab Spring or Arab uprising, whatever you want to call it, is continuing to spread. It's happening in many countries, not just Libya. We're obviously fixated on Libya. But Bahrain, you could say, arguably is of greater strategic importance to the United States because of being the home of the Fifth Fleet. And it's also, a key Persian Gulf island that's right near Saudi Arabia across an isthmus. And so what we've been seeing is the United States trying to encourage the royal family in Bahrain to engage in credible talks with the opposition. In the meantime, we've seen Saudi Arabia sending in its own
So what do we say to the Saudis?
Forces. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question because the Saudi King Abdullah is actually viewed by the United States government as quite a reformer, as being out in front.
But are we hammering them?
There's no question that that the U.S. has expressed publicly, Hillary Clinton has done so, her reservations and concerns about any violence
How about privately?
in
Does it go further?
Bahrain. I think they want to push the Saudis to not be party to any kind of violence in Bahrain, or for that matter, in Saudi Arabia.
Maybe behind the curve on this, too. It may be too late because there already is violence in Bahrain, and the Saudi
right.
tanks are in there.
That's
Let me
right.
just ask you about one more thing. A deal in Pakistan, the CIA contractor who killed alleged attackers was released with blood money paid to the family's victims. Does this put the U.S.-Pakistani or the U.S.-ISI relationships back on course?
Well, there's no question that the Raymond Davis case, the CIA contractor to whom you refer, has been a big sticking point, and it was the cause of the U.S. calling off the trilateral summit with Pakistan and Afghanistan last month in February that didn't happen. So now there definitely were conversations between Leon Panetta and his counterpart in Pakistan, General Pasha, and there is talk that perhaps an agreement, a deal was cut that the U.S. would inform Pakistan more about its activities of the CIA operatives working in that country.
My guess is this will be an evolving story. And dear Hans, let me ask you about the tragedy of Japan. The U.S., the Obama administration says it still wants to proceed with its commitment to nuclear power. Are they really going to stick with that?
There was when the president gave his remarks on Thursday, a clever line was inserted in on Japan's peaceful nuclear energy. That was a clear tip. The president has been saying this publicly and privately to his aides. He doesn't want to outsource the risk of getting energy production. There has to be a nuclear component to that, and we cannot overreact to something that is a once in a generation, once in 100 years, 1,000 years that happened, the tragedy that happened in Japan.
President is in South America, of course, this weekend. No deliverables, but some symbolism. Anything else?
This is mostly about trade, doubling exports in 5 years. They're up 20% over the year. They think they're making progress, but all this currency money that's sloshing around out there, a lot of uncertainty in the market, it's complicating what the president wants to do. That could take center stage in Brazil, because Brazil has seen their own currency appreciate so much.
Okay. Boy, it's a difficult and dangerous world. Thank you both very much. And when we come back, the world helps as the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear crisis in Japan take a human and economic toll. The last word right after this break. Welcome back. We'll go to Margaret, Carlson, and Cato Burn in just a moment. But first, G7 countries have come to Japan's aid with an intervention to weaken the yen and stabilize the market. Bloomberg's Sara Eisen joins us now from Osaka. Sara, will the G7 intervention make a difference for Japan?
Well, I just spoke with the deputy finance minister here in Japan, Al. He said two important things. One is he said that they got confirmation that if they needed to go back into the market and intervene again to weaken the yen, they will. That's an important point, because when it comes to intervention, currency markets, it's a $4 trillion a day market trading. So there's plenty of speculators and other traders, institutions that are able to fight the intervention. That's one point, that they could come back. Another point he said is that with regard to the U.S., he said that on the call he heard that U.S. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner was a good friend to the Japanese finance minister, and he was one of the ones who initiated the coordinated intervention. So overall, a pretty positive sign.
Sara, you've observed Japan now for the last several days. What impact can you see that it's having on the economy, on just simple food supplies?
It all comes down to what happens with the nuclear crisis up north in Fukushima, Al. We can't get a gauge on just how much this is going to cost. The deputy finance minister says it. Economists here say it. We're starting to get estimates about the cost to the economy of the earthquake and the tsunami, $100 billion to $200 billion. Nomura, the country's biggest brokerage, just came out and lowered the GDP forecast from about a third, from 1.5% in 2011 to grow now 1.1%. But the real answer lies in what happens up north, because remember, so many big business in Japan are closed. It was a triple whammy. It started with the earthquake, then the tsunami, closing some factories up north that were damaged. And then you have this nuclear crisis, fears about radiation levels rising, power outages from Tokyo and really across the country, halting even more plants, closing offices, keeping people inside, keeping people away from big cities like Tokyo, heading south here to Osaka. Just to give you a small example, Al, H&M just announced that it's closing all of its stores, less than 10 stores in Tokyo.
Sara, is the Prime Minister history? He seems to be in just terrible shape.
Yeah, before the earthquake, his approval ratings were below 20%. He was criticized for not cleaning up the debt problem. Remember, Japan has 200% public debt to GDP. It's the most indebted country in the entire world, and he had not come up with a plan for fighting it. He was also under an ethics investigation. One political analyst said that this was his Katrina moment. There are some local reports here that on Monday, which is a local holiday in Japan, he's going to go to Sendai, which is the quake-hit area, to show his support for the victims. He also made it clear just a few hours ago that he's getting all the information and giving it to the people, because as you know, there have been some questions about just how much the Japanese government is letting on.
Yeah, there sure have been. Look, Sara Eisen, be safe over there in Osaka. Thank you very much. Let me turn to Kate and Margaret now. The battle at home, not nearly as cataclysmic, obviously, but still important financially. Kate, battle of the budget, who's winning, and which party's caucus is more divided?
Al, I think the Republicans are unanimous. Unanimous on the fundamental question. They all agree we face an incredible debt crisis. We're drowning in red ink. The only disagreements have been about how far or fast to cut, or strategically, how should the House Republicans pressure the Senate to come up with something. Even on the most recent temporary bill, only 22 out of, 87 freshmen disagreed with the Speaker. On the Democratic side, Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer don't vote the right way. And in the Senate...
same way.
The same way.
Right.
Only Steny Hoyer is voting the right way. And in the Senate, there's no fundamental agreement among Senate Democrats that significant cuts even have to be made. You have Harry Reid talking about draconian cuts, and his example is the Cowboy Poetry Festival.
So unified Republicans and divided Democrats?
No, I mean, John Boehner looks as if he's being, it's the tail wagging the dog. He's being led by his freshmen. We can see the outlines of a deal. John Boehner probably can't deliver it. He's going to have to get out some of the ideological cuts like Planned Parenthood. It is not going to make it. And what he's telling his caucus is, listen, let us do this and then live to fight another day. Paul Ryan will have the budget. We have the debt ceiling, although he certainly doesn't want them voting against the debt ceiling. But let us get through till September 30th with the budget here.
The House voted to cut funding for NPR.
NPR has had a bad run of it, and the temptation to punish them
How would you have
is
voted?
very, very high. Listen, I think NPR will be able to go on its own eventually, but there needs to be some kind of transition. You can't just take the money away in one fell swoop.
Oh, Al, public broadcasting, as you know, was founded in 1967. Oh my gosh, when there were a handful of alternatives. Now, with thousands of choices, all these different new platforms, it's completely impossible to make a case as to why taxpayers ought to be subsidizing National Public Radio. Look at their listening audience, incredibly affluent. It's an example of like elite entitlement.
Kate, no question NPR has been run by a bunch of idiots, and some incredibly capable and great journalists have not been well served by that leadership. Thank you. I am always well served by both of you, so thank you very much, and thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you again next week.
Political Capital is a production of Bloomberg Television.